Hey, it's Karl again at Rooster Studio. I wanted to do a follow-up on this little studio palette soap dish that I made with Art Wheel watercolors a while back, and I've been playing with it a little bit. I haven't used it a lot. I've been using my other sets of watercolors for what I've been painting, but I wanted to do a follow-up and kind of show the adjustments that I've made. And I figured while I'm doing that, I might as well do a little review on this bee paper that I bought at. I was wandering through Walmart the other day, getting stuff for the pool, and walked by and I saw this happen to sit there in the just that they had rearranged the store and their art section was in a different spot now. Um, and I saw these little stacks of bee paper that I'd never really paid attention to before. Uh, and this is a nice thick pad of 140-pound watercolor paper from Bee Paper Company, and it was 10.97 at Walmart. It was 11.88 with tax. I did all my figuring out here. Uh, Breaking this down, it's 50 sheets at 140 pounds, so it's 9 by 12, and if you attack all these together, you'd end up with 8.19, or a little over 8 full imperial sheets of 22 by 30 sheets at a buck 46 a sheet, and that's with tax. Um, so when you're looking at online places like Dick Blick or Jerry's or wherever, at least here in the U.S., um, I like to convert when I see oddball stuff like this, watercolor paper blocks. I like to do the math and convert the square inches into um, what it would cost if you were buying this paper by the full size sheet, because usually that's a little cheaper than these pads. But $1.46 a sheet for this quality of watercolor paper is really good, in my opinion. I've had pretty good luck with this paper. Uh, it's it reminds me a lot of Strathmore 400. Uh, it's not cotton. It's acid free, natural white, but it is. I believe it's pulp paper. Hopefully it's alpha pulp, but even so, it's acid free. It's great practice paper. I've seen some complaints about people saying that it's too absorbent or the sizing is off, but that has not been my experience with this. It is a little more absorbent, I guess, than maybe some of my regular watercolor papers, Arches and Saunders Waterford. Uh, what have I been using lately? The Blick Premier stuff is actually really good. I think it's made in the same mill as Saunders Waterford. Um, those are $6 a sheet. This is a quarter of that price, and it's been really good so far for just doing practicing and swatching. And I've actually painted quite a few little ACEO size paintings and a couple of smaller paintings with it. I have yet to do a wash across one of the full sheets. And that's been one of the complaints that I saw, is that the sizing is not consistent across the whole sheet. And I've seen that before in other brands of student grade watercolor paper. Uh, but at the ACEO size, these little guys here, um, it's been really good as far as the sizing goes. I'm able to scrub and lift, put tape on it, pull tape off. It seems to hold up pretty well. Um, I don't scrub a lot anymore when I'm painting. Scrub to lift color off. But the times that I have, it doesn't seem to pill up. I mean, it seems it's a pretty hard paper. The only I think the biggest thing that I don't like about it is, let's see. Yeah, this is it. If oh, there's a bug on my paper. Um, it's got a great cold press texture on the front, but the back is almost hot press. It's almost completely smooth. Um, but it works good for pen and ink. Uh, this is a Uniball micro. I think it's a 5 or 0.5 mil point on it. Same super Uniball ink or whatever they call their waterproof ink. Uh, it doesn't bleed in this paper. nice sharp lines. Yeah, even when you load it up with color, I mean it's got a wet sheen across it right now, but it soaks in and doesn't feather out. Uh, Dummy. Now that was still wet where I just did that. Normally that ink is going to be super dry real fast. Yeah, see there on those lines, it's done. It's all waterproof. Um, but I mean, it's if you're just painting on the face of something, this is great, and this is very much like the Strathmore 400 I was mentioning earlier. They also have a good cold press texture on the front, but the back is machine made. Kind of a theirs is it's almost got like a woven texture to it, but clearly machine made, and it feels smoother on the back than the front. And that stuff is definitely more expensive than this. I haven't looked at the price on it, but as far as the $1.46 a sheet calculation goes, I haven't looked into the B paper company really at all. I know they make cotton paper as well, but I have so many different brands of paper that I'm happy with. I haven't had a chance to or inclination to go and buy more paper to store in the studio. So, but I couldn't pass this up. And I was walking by, I saw it was 10.97. I looking through it, and some of the, you know how it is when you go into a Michaels or an AC Moore or Walmart or whatever. Um, there was, I don't know, three or four of these, and the other three, the corner. I mean, it looked like it had just been thrown across the room. It was smashed, like all 50 sheets. The corners were busted up, and one of them, had a torn cover. It was just, anything that sits there and is handled by the public. I don't like buying that kind of paper, but this one looked pretty good. It was at the bottom of the pile. Um, so I snatched it up, and I figure what better way to test out cheap watercolor paint than with a, cheap paper and still be able to make some decent paintings with it. Like I say, I've been really happy with the way it handles. There's a lot of glare on these little penny sleeves. Um, these are varnished. After I painted them, I varnished them. Uh, but yeah, it's a nice at least when you varnish, it doesn't buckle too much when it's wet, and it buckles like all watercolor papers do. It didn't seem to buckle overly much, and that's one of the other things that I saw people were complaining about is that it warps. But I mean, there again, a lot of times this kind of a product is gonna gather new people who aren't experienced painters, and that's kind of one of my pet peeves when I go look at reviews for things is when the first line is, "Hey, this is my first try at watercolors." Well, then don't leave a review. You don't. All you're doing is wasting time because you don't know what you're doing yet. I mean, that may sound cruel or mean or whatever, but um, it's not helpful to read reviews by somebody who's not familiar with how a thing should perform. So yeah, I get a little irritated with that. So you see a lot of people. This is my first watercolor pad. I don't like the way it performed. Well, try some other paper. Try papers that are 20 bucks a sheet, and you'll see that they do some of that same stuff that you're talking about. So I mean, it really it comes down to practicing and learning whatever tools you got within reason. This is as far as I'm concerned one of the better student grade practice type papers that I've come across. With Strathmore 400 being probably I don't know. This is a close second to it. The Strathmore I'm still kind of partial to for one-sided paper. Um, as far as practicing making swashes and that sort of thing, seeing how watercolor paints perform on that paper is very similar to Arch and other papers that I have some Winsor and Newton roughs that uh, the Strathmore really performs well against. Um, and the Winsor Newton rough also has a flat surface on the back. But yeah, I'll pull some paper out of this, and it's a glue bound. The top is bound by glue, and it's got a fold over. I'm sorry, I don't have a whole lot of room here on my desk. But you can see the glue binding across the top there. Uh, it's a little it's a little tough. Well, I'll just yank one out. You see how you kind of get it. There we go. You get it pulling away from the glue. Well, like pretty much any glue bound pad. it does okay. Let me put this out of the way here somewhere. All right. So a little bit of glue left on the paper on the top, which fine. It's, 9 by 12. I don't normally do anything 9 by 12 anyhow. And I like deckled edges. So what I would probably do is, yeah, this is a little tough to get that glue off of there. What I would probably do is, fold this over. I would turn it over with the face down when I do the folding. I would score it with a bone folder or something. Um, run something not necessarily sharp, but run a crease across it, then fold it over, and then rip it by hand, and then you've got a nice hand-torn deckle edge on it. Um, if I was going to do a full sheet of this, but you probably can't see the texture. It's a good cold press texture. It doesn't look terribly machine made like a lot of them. Like, you'll be able to see the weave in there. You can see it, but it's especially working smaller. It's pretty random as far as what the pattern of the texture is. I'm just going to tear this down a little bit so it's a little more manageable. Um, I'm folding, like I say, I don't like cut edges on my watercolor paper, so I just fold it over halfway. And this is the same thing that I do with full size imperial sheets. Um, you get that nice torn deckle edge, and I always fold with a face down. That way I can always tell what's the front and the back, because there's that little bend on the crease there that you make. But I'll go this over one more time, and I found with this 9 by 12 that I can get. Wow, it's a tough paper. It's a lot tougher than a lot of cotton papers that I work with. Um, put those up there. But I found with these 9 by 12s that out of each sheet, I can get two ACEOs going this direction. Sorry, each quarter sheet off of the 9 by 12. So each 9 by 12 sheet, I can get one, two, three, four. I can get 8 ACEOs, and for $10.79, you take one sheet, quarter it, put a couple of ACEOs out, sell them for 10, 15 bucks a piece, and you've got free paper. Um, and even sell them for $5 a piece, whatever. Uh, it's easy to recoup the cost of this paper, and then you've got, I've already sold several of them, so that whole pad that I've got left there is essentially free. Um, so that's one of the things that I like to do is uh, when I'm looking at cheap, inexpensive art supplies, like, can I use that to make enough money to cover the cost of purchasing it for review and that sort of thing? I'm not sponsored by anybody. I don't do any, well, okay, that's not, I have some companies that have sent me things for free to review for them, and I haven't published any of that yet. I'm on the fence a little. I don't want to. I don't want to feel obligated. Like, I'm going to tell the truth about whatever I'm reviewing, and that's. I feel bad when I do that. For to a company that's giving me something free. uh, so yeah, I don't. I like to be able to sell enough of whatever product I'm reviewing to cover the cost of me purchasing it, and that way I feel I can give a non-biased opinion. Uh, yeah, and sleep a little better at night, I guess. Not that I would compromise myself, but I would feel obligated to, and you know that's just not great. So a lot of times what I've been doing, like, okay, so for an imperial sheet, a 22 by 30, if you fold it in half, tear it, fold those in half, tear them, fold those in half, tear them, fold those in half, tear them. You get a 16th sheet, which looks like this. Now this is the B paper, the from the a quarter sheet from the 9 by 12, and this is the 16th sheet from a 22 by 30, and I can get 4 ACEOs out of each one of these 16th sheets. Um, So I can get 64 ACEOs out of one sheet of paper. And even if I pay, okay, so I say pay $10 for an expensive piece of watercolor paper, I get 64 ACEO paintings out of them. Say I botch half of them, that's still 32. Sell each one of those for $5 a piece and do the math. I mean, you're 150 bucks or whatever, and 167. I'm not doing the math, but you recoup the cost of that paper over and over. I mean, realistically, you sell 4 paintings out of it using 1/16 of it, and you've paid for that paper and then some, probably a couple of sheets. So it's not hard to recoup the cost of any of your materials. Now with the 9x12s, quartering this, only getting 2, I'd have to do the math, but you're not going to get 64. Yeah, you're not going to get 64 ACEOs out of this because there's going to be a lot more slop around the edge than what it is with those guys. I've got one that's here. This one's, nope, that's not right. Somewhere here, I've got something that's quartered out. Now that I said that, everything's already been cut up. This is what it looks like to be unprepared. All right, so here we go. This is close enough. This is 16th sheet, and that's how tight the tolerances are. Like I wouldn't be able to see that little gap there. I wouldn't be able to get another ACEO out of the top of this because I went up too far. They should follow that, and even that gets a little tight. I like to go right to the edges on all 4 of them, and yeah. So I'm really miserly, and I don't need to be. So I've been trying to get away from it. Like something like this, I really only care to get 1 ACEO out of it because it's fun to, you notice I use these little travel palettes and like small palettes. I don't do a lot of mixing in the palette. I like to mix on the paper. And often I like to mix in the painting, not just on the paper next to the painting, but in the painting. For instance, say I want to make a tree that has 2 colors. Well, I want to make a tree with shadows and lights. So you can just, you could mix up a green on your palette, and then all you got is just a green blob. But if you, I'm getting OCD with this tree. It doesn't matter what the shape is. Now with this, you can even use ultramarine blue, because ultramarine blue is notoriously, it makes dingy greens because it's kind of purpley. It's a warm blue. I'm sorry, I'm not using the proper terms here, but dropping ultramarine into a yellow like that, you get your shadows, you keep the highlights, and this is not awesome, but when you're tilted, all the darks will run to the bottom mostly. This is quick and dirty. So then you add a trunk to it. A couple of limbs. And if it's dry, I would have left more white space in there. There. Lift some out. Got a little more trunk in here and here. Got a little overzealous with the lifting. Oops, I'm mixing colors now. But you get my point. I like mixing colors dynamically in my painting, or at least next to the painting, because stuff happens. The way watercolor works, if you mix a green, I'll just do it. So I use those 2 colors on my palette, and I mix this muddy looking green, and all I'm stuck with is, that same green across the whole tree. Which is okay. I mean, in certain instances, especially for like background stuff, if you want to, put like a row of poplars or something behind a house, single color green is fine. But up close with details like this, it's nice to be able to, say the light source is from here. I got my yellow highlights, and you can keep dropping in the ultramarine into that yellow or whatever color blue you're using for your shadows in your green, and it does that watercolor magic thing where it's like, okay, I'm going to flow over here the way I want. You can control it, like all watercolors, you can control it, but a lot of the magic of watercolors is how loose it is, or it should be. Well, that's not true. It doesn't have to be, but I like it because I am a OCD control freak, draftsman. I am super tight when I'm drawing with pencils and things. Watercolor just it allows me to relax, and it's very therapeutic for me to use watercolors, and it's why it's become my favorite medium over the years. Uh, because I feel, I mean, even that tree right there, it's it's hard for me to stop there, but it's just, maybe a couple more, a couple more things that I can do here, and all of a sudden I'm like, hey, that's turning out kind of cool, and I turn it into a painting, and then sell it, and or cut it out and stick it in my sketchbook or something, just because I like the way something happened here or there. Um, it's yeah, just dropping colors into the painting itself is a lot more fun for me. So long story short, that's why that's why I'm not terribly concerned anymore about getting in just as many ACEOs as I can out of a sheet of paper and just being so tight-fisted with I call it being frugal, I guess. It's not it's not a bad habit. My grandfather was, well, both my grandfathers were they didn't waste things. Well, I don't think a lot of, at least for my generation, I don't think any of our grandfathers wasted anything, because everything was, you had to work hard for everything you got. And nowadays, our time is worth more than our money. Um, but that didn't used to be the case. So I kind of grew up with the mindset of save everything you can, make all your materials count. Like when I do construction projects, um, I buy enough wood to, maybe have 20% for offcuts and things, and then I'll still sit there and engineer each piece. Like, oh, I could get, I could use this 2x4 up and only have 3 inches of waste at the end. Where a lot of jobs I've worked, don't worry about it. Just cut 5 foot out of an 8 footer, and we'll use the 3 footers later somewhere else. But in my head, I sit there and engineer. Okay, I can use those 3 footers for something else now, and I don't have to buy, more wood. So, again, this is unscripted. It's been a while since I made a video. Um, this was the best thing I could think to do was revisit this watercolor, this art whale palette that I made. So off we go. Uh, I drew out the ACO. Just that little template that I made. This is I think it's Strathmore 500 like cotton illustration board, and I cut a 2.5 by 3.5 inch, a little bigger uh, hole out of it. So when I trace around it, it's constricted, and this is actually perfect 2.5 by 3.5 square, or rectangle, I guess. So now when I'm playing with my palettes, and I want to see, it's clearly it's hard to see what color is that. So I can, splash it out there. It's like, oh, okay, that's my Payne's gray. And as I'm working with it, if I was to drop that much Payne's gray into anything on a painting this size, it would just it was a big black mark. So I play with it up there, and I kind of make the paper my mixing palette when I need to do things like that. Um, what in the world? So, um, yeah, I'll do a little painting here, but I wanted to kind of explain what I have done since the initial video where, if you watched it, you saw the glob of burnt umber, brown, whatever, Van Dyke, whatever it was. It got away from me and landed over here, and just, yeah, it didn't go as well as it could have because of the goopiness of the Art Whale watercolors in that second set that I had bought. They have since sent me a free third set of the 24 tubes, because they knew that, or they had been getting some complaints about the binders separating so badly from the pigment. So yeah, they sent me another set of 24. So I got 3 sets of 24 now, and it's, I mean, that's a lot of paint, even with the ones that I don't use, the oddball colors and the kind of sketchy pigmentation. They did fix the cerulean blue. Um, it was hardened in the tubes on the first 2 sets that I got. Um, but yeah, that watercolor paint, super cheap. This paper, super cheap, and I've been able to, without doing anything different than I do with my expensive paper and expensive paint, make art that is, in my opinion, just as good as the other stuff. And I'm using only the light fast colors um, in that set of 24. There's some that are a little questionable as far as light fastness, but for this, it's just PBR7, uh, yeah, PB29, just the stuff that I know is going to stay archival. Um, so which means I've only got like 12 colors or something in here, and the whites from, I think that's a Shinhan white or something. There's no white in that 24 color set, which is I'm great with that. Yeah, don't send me a white in a set. I've got my own white tubes, and I like a particular brand, and that's what I'll use. But overall, I've been very happy with this paper. Very happy, and I've been very happy with these Artwhale watercolors. Even though I mean, there's some filler in there. Uh, they're not they're not as pure as Daniel Smith or M. Graham or, oh gosh, all of the all of the expensive watercolors. But boy, just starting out with these two things, you can make a lot of money to buy better art supplies if you just focus on ACEOs and selling them. And I'm working on a whole bunch of tutorials about how to do that or how I do it. And uh, I won't say it's lucrative. It's work, but I mean it's pays for a lot of stuff here in the studio, just selling ACEO paintings, and I really enjoy doing them too. I think there's a therapy that's involved with just being able to work small like this. Um, it takes up no space whatsoever. Like if you're painting on a full sheet, you got to have a studio set up. It's an easel, and I mean there's you can't just sit anywhere. But with something like this, or little travel kits, um, you can take pieces of paper with you anywhere, like to buy one sheet of real good cotton watercolor paper, rip it up into 16ths. You got a nice little stack of paper. Take that with you. Take this with you. Get yourself a paper cup of water anywhere, and you're painting with a whatever brush that you bring with you. And it's for me, it's very fulfilling to sell my art. It makes me feel validated. And I know a lot of people think, oh, don't do it just for the money. And I absolutely agree with them. If you get obligated, I don't do a lot of commission work. I try not to, because as soon as you're obligated, at least for me, man, that puts the pressure on, and it's like it just puts the kibosh on my creative spirit, and I find it really hard to even get started, because what if I screw it up? What if I don't do it right? What if they don't like it? That's the worst thing for me. I'm the kind of spirit that when somebody says, "Hey, good job," and pats me on the back, I feel like a cat in the sunshine. I'm so happy, um, and that's been my whole life. My father was always very encouraging. My mother too. Um, yeah, just a lot of encouragement when I create things and when I did things, and even when they were horrible, there was a lot of support there, and there still is. That's my father. My mother passed away, but my father yeah, has always been incredibly supportive. I've been truly blessed to have a dad like that. Um, yeah, uh, painting little stuff and selling it makes me feel good. Even now I call my dad and hey dad, I sold 3 paintings today, and I made $30 or whatever. And he's always saying, hey kid, that's great, and it makes me feel good, and it gives me $30. I can buy more art supply for $30, which I do, which I have done, and which is why I have basically hoarded myself out of room to work in my studio. So that's when the YouTube videos started coming along. I want to do these reviews that I've had in mind to do for a decade, and then get rid of the art supplies because I have the sets that I'm going to use the rest of my life. I know the brands I like, um, pretty much everything, the paints that I want to use, and the styles and the mediums I want to use. But in the meantime, I need to get rid of some stuff. So documenting what I've learned about all of the things that I've purchased and used to make art with, that makes me feel good that I can then sell them off on eBay or donate them or give them away as prizes or whatever. So yeah, but just yammering on, aren't I? So this paper, as far as I'm concerned, it holds water well. You can see that puddle is still sitting there, and it's been hot here in Texas. It's 75 degrees right now in the studio with the air conditioning on. Um, and I got two fans blowing in here. Uh, and this paper stays wet. It is absorbent. It does buckle. Oh, here, I'll just do it. I'm just pre-wetting the paper, and then we're gonna grab this color, which is their cerulean blue. Now I'm pretty happy with even that sky. I used to get really tight and like, let's make perfect clouds, but with watercolor, the you infer stuff. It's well, with impressionistic art, you don't have to make everything look perfect, but it is, excuse me, it is fun to roll a tiny piece of wadded paper towel through a cloud here and there and get some harder edges to work with. I like the lost edges or fuzzy edges as well. Now this kit doesn't have the Art Whale doesn't have a raw sienna in that 24 tube um, set, so I just mix a little burnt sienna with some yellow ochre, and that, again, this is nice to have the paper up here, um, and then just drop that into the bottom of the clouds because I'm planning on making the raw sienna is going to be my warm color at the horizon and down into whatever I'm working on here. I don't know what I'm painting yet. I'm just making the sky and playing with it. A lot of times I'll just start painting this way. I don't have a destination in mind, um, and I just try to use the tips and tricks and things that I've learned over time. Like you see how really, I guess maybe this side's a little lighter than this side, so I would say the light source would be coming from here if I was to leave it like this, and that's good enough for me. So we will call the light source coming in from the left side. And you gotta be careful mixing yellow ochre with blue. It will turn green in the sky. It tones it down some by adding the burnt sienna in there because that's an earth color. But you still, yellow and blue make green. You got to be careful. As you can see, I wet that paper down pretty good, and it did soak it up, and it did warp. But all watercolor paper does. And one thing that you can do, I'm finally starting to see some artists that are on YouTube as well that are finally starting to wet both sides of the paper. I've seen for so many years, so many people, soaking their watercolor paper in a tub and then taping it down with that weird glue tape. And what are you doing? I know you think you're stretch. Well, I guess you are stretching the paper, but if you wet both sides, the reason the buckle happens on watercolor paper is you have two sides. You got the back and the front, and in between is a bunch of, well, this is pulp paper, but even the cotton, you've got material in between. You wet the front, The middle stays mostly dry, and the back is absolutely dry. Paper, when you wet it, it expands, it gets bigger. Well, if you're holding on the backside, if you're holding that paper dry in the shape that it is, the mechanical dimension that it is when you're working with it, and you wet the top swells and has nowhere to go, so it buckles up trying to grow in both directions, which is why you get those buckles. If you wet the back expands and catches up with the front. And so both sides are then wet. Actually, the front's drier now than the back. So while you're working with it, if you keep it wet on both sides or just wet it down, it'll relax. Um, Now I varnish most of my work too, which is great for uh, bringing that paper back into shape, because the varnish is a polyurethane or acrylic, whatever coating I'm putting on it. Uh, it soaks in to the paper and then it hardens and tightens up. And if you do it on both sides, it brings them right back into being dimensionally stable and nice and flat, and it gives a good finish on it. So I just wet that again. What am I going to do? And right now I'm happy with that sky. That's good enough for anything that I'm going to do right now. Let's see, what's a good cop out thing for me to do? We'll do a windmill. No, a lighthouse. Um, Grabbing a little bit of the um, ultramarine blue with the cerulean, and I'm kind of running it through that. Remember that puddle of pain gray that I made earlier? I'm kind of getting it a little darker. Um, Trying to establish where my water's going to be and horizon line and that sort of thing. If I'm doing a lighthouse, I'm going to do a little seascape. Now the paper's wet, so it's you can see it. The water is running up into the sky. Until I get up here to where the paper is not wet anymore and it doesn't move. The paint doesn't climb up out of it. Uh, but I'll stop that there. I'm going to draw some of the paint out of it with it. I'm just dabbing my brush on my paper towel water over here to kind of randomize this initial pass of the water. Um, I'm going to go ahead and blow dry this really quick. The sky is already dry enough. Like I could add things to the sky and it wouldn't bleed anymore. What? It ran away from me. Now the paper is nice and dry now. Well, it's the front is face is dry enough to work with. And what I'm going to do, this is a because this is just regular masking tape. It just happens to be orange colored. I'm just masking a quick water line across there, and as I'm doing that, I'm just looking at this line down here, the border of the ACEO, and just eyeballing it. It only really needs to be eyeballed if you've got a halfway decent eye. If I was to put a micrometer on there or something, I'm sure I'm off by a half a millimeter. I'm just throwing in some waves there, and I'm adding some darks to the sparkle. As I've been making these YouTube videos, I've noticed that it's quite handy to be able to look up at my screen that shows I'm using OBS as my video recording software, and I can watch what I'm painting up there while I'm painting it down here, and I get a good, better perspective of what this looks like looking at it through the camera. Because right now it's when I look down, if I look straight down, I'm way over here, so I got to look down and then up to get up to where the painting is in it, so it's a skewed picture. Um, which is why they invented easels and whatnot for larger larger paintings. So I'm just throwing some interesting stuff in here. Essentially just establishing that horizon line there. And since I dried the paper, I can pull my masking tape back off. Oh, no, I can't. That's one of the things about this paper I've noticed is um, if you don't let it dry, well, that's most paper. If you don't let it dry all the way, you can tear the face of it off. This is not low tack masking tape at all. So yeah, that pulled up a, I don't know if you can see it or not. That pulled up the face of the paper right there. Uh, Normally that would be the end of the painting for me. Having a having a broken surface in the middle like that is not my favorite thing. What we're gonna do is just carry on and sally forth. I'm gonna rip that piece right off. A couple of pieces there. I'm gonna go ahead and yank. I think what probably happened since I wet the back of that paper, um, there's still some moisture. Oh yeah, it's still moist back there. Um, so that allowed that face to come free and stick to the masking tape. Not a big deal. Mix a little more raw sienna, and I keep saying raw sienna. I'm going to mix a little more uh, yellow ochre with burnt sienna. I'm going to run some streaks and clouds across there to find, yeah, see how it soaks into the, now you can see where the rip is. So there's a couple of things you can do to fix that. I could put my lighthouse right there and work that the darkness of where the sizing is different because I ripped the face of the paper off. Work that into my lighthouse. It's a little centered in the picture, uh, in the composition. I mean, I could put a boat there with a mast or something. Anyway, we will consider that as we work on the rest of it. I'm just adding some yellow there because I'm going to drop some green. Well, I'm going to drop some ultramarine blue into it. Get myself a bit of a land structure there. A little too much yellow down on the, what I would call the beach area, I guess. I'm going to pull some of that off. Replace it with some yellow ochre. If we go, yeah, you can see as the paper dries, the visual mistake kind of goes away there. Sorry, the pigment soaking into the rough part of the paper where it ripped, that effect is kind of getting lighter. So now I'm still gonna, yeah, I'm still gonna build a lighthouse out there. Colors I'm using are, I actually don't remember what that yellow is called. Where's my other? That is their ACEO yellow medium, which is benzimidazolone yellow and PO62, which is I think is also a benzy orange. Um, but it's a nice, real warm yellow. Uh, So I'm using that yellow, uh, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue in a couple different places. The Payne's gray, is that? Yeah, their Payne's gray is PBK6 and PB19, which is quinacridone, geez, a loop, quinacridone uh, violet. Here I'm just adding some, since the light source is coming from this side, I'm just adding some depth to the darkness over here of to the shadows of these trees that I just put in. A little over here too. I guess I'm going to pretend that this is this little area right here is a sandbar or beach or something that's kind of sticking out in the foreground. And since we're going all the way out here with our lighthouse, I'll make it a small lighthouse and it'll be in the background of a different sandbar or whatever you call these fingers sticking out into the bay or the sound there. And make some smaller trees back there just to change the color so I can follow this line of the beach. I'm gonna add some depth to the sand. This is a sandy beach, so I'll put some rocks on it later. These random shaped rocks. And we're gonna work some of that burnt sienna in there as well. All right, if I'm silent for a while, uh, I watch a lot of YouTube, or I have watched a lot of YouTube videos in the past, and I find it, I don't want to say it frustrating or even off-putting. Uh, a lot of people just, like the whole video, they're just, blah, 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 it's like they don't come up for air, and it's like, it's okay, you don't have to say things the whole time. I'm sure some people like that, but since I don't have a plan, but this is a completely unplanned video and painting, uh, trying to find things to talk about is a little difficult sometimes. So mostly I would rather just paint, but that gets a little boring, I guess, for some people. All right, I'm going to try to define the shape of this lighthouse that's out here. I know that since, you probably can't see it there, there's one almost vertical rip that's kind of perfect for the angle of a lighthouse, and since the light source is this way, the shadow is going to be on that side. As I get older, I can see that painting into my later years is, I think my style is going to become more loose, uh, not intentionally, just out of necessity, because at least if I continue painting these tiny things, it is very hard to do these tiny paintings. My hand wants to shake. Like that out there. All right, so I've covered the one little tear going down this direction, and there's another one that kind of comes down at an angle there. But I'm just going to leave that. Since I varnish anyways, the varnish adds a nice top coat. You won't be able to feel the rip that was in there. So yeah, salvaging mistakes is always a fun thing to practice and learn how to do. Sorry, I'm getting my hand gets in the way of what I'm painting. So my foreground sandbar runs right along here. So what I'm going to try to do is it's a little bit of dark to further define the difference between this sandbar in the foreground and that tree line in the background that heads out to that other finger that's the lighthouse lives on. Um, but I don't want to go too dark out there because distance, atmospheric perspective. When things get farther away, they get lighter because the air gets in the way and you don't see as much color. So I got to be careful how much dark I put back there because I've got to match that dark in the foreground and then take it even farther. A lot of people, myself included, it, it's intimidating dropping dark into your watercolor painting because there's no fixing it. Well, yeah, that's not entirely true, but um, it's harder to fix it when you do something with a lot of dark in your watercolor painting. Well, I'm just defining some little doodads and rocks on the beach. Since I had that dark in my brush. I really like Kolinsky brushes, the Kolinsky sable brushes, um, because they don't they're very good at controlling how much water you lay down at one time, and there's no synthetic brush on the planet that can do that same thing. I'm just adding some larger trees here, trying to scale them up a little bit in this foreground to separate them from what's in the background there. I mean, I really could be bold and go up farther, but at this point, since I ripped the face of that paper, I'm just trying to get out of this with a successful painting. So I'm not gonna go crazy about adding a whole bunch of stuff. This guy is gonna have a little house coming off that side of him. Shadow's gonna fall that direction. We're gonna have a small house on the front side. House or building or you know part of the lighthouse. And add some little bit of rust to the roof of the lighthouse, kind of tie the roof lines in together. Tighten up this corner right here. One more building I'll add. All right, then we're going to add a man. All right, that's a weird power pole. It is very well. Let's figure out something. Let's see. We're going to add another one here. Come on, hands, stop shaking. What am I going to turn that down? That one's pretty thick too. Anyway, we'll add. Well, yeah, that's not that. We'll turn that into a tree. With a big poplar there. And another one behind this building here. All right. I need a little bit of shadow color of no particular, yeah, a little more blue than that. There we go. Pull that off. Got some windows, more shadow there, more windows. We're going to shadow the front of that. You probably can't see anything that I'm doing. I'll just show a close-up picture of it afterwards. Um, Most of what I'm doing, I'm saying, oh, I'm adding a shadow here and a shadow there, and all I'm doing is adding like a molecule of paint and just kind of going using my Zen to put stuff in place there. I kind of like this rock in the front. In the foreground, I'm going to leave it kind of light colored. Yeah, that's good. I like it like that. Um, Maybe it's a calm day. I'm at the point now where I probably realistically should put the big, when I say big brushes, you know, like a number 6 or something. Um, I should put this away. It just gets too hard to add detail to something that size, and it gets wasteful too. You know, it picks up a lot of paint for this level of what I'm doing. Hold on, I'm gonna do one. I'm gonna darken this up just a little bit out here. Give it a little more depth. So that's good. What am I gonna use for a tiny brush? I know. Why not a tiny brush? That paintbrush I was just using there was a this is the Rhapsody Kolinsky Sable. It's from Creative Mark. Um, Jerry's Artorama sells them. Amazing Kolinsky brushes. I got a bunch of them. Uh, and this is, I mean, I've been using this one hard for a year, and as long as you take care of it, and they last forever, and they do a really good job of controlling how much paint you put down. Even these little guys, this is weasel hair or something. It's a cheap Chinese brush, and it's natural hair, but sometimes, man, it'll just all of a sudden dump a bunch of paint on it. It's pretty frustrating. Um, it's like it holds a lot of water, but it also releases it. I don't know if the bristles maybe are thicker or something, but I like to try to do some practice strokes. Like right now, I'm trying to just add some tiny birds. With the speckles there, I'm going to do I'd like to see a little more red and darks on that beach. So I'm going to be brave and just add some textures and hope it doesn't fly up in the sky. And if it does, I'll just turn it into a bird or something. I'm just putting wet paint into my brush and lightly tapping it onto the a pen to get it to splatter a little bit, a little more controlled fashion. Yeah, that added some nice textures to the foreground. A couple of trees. This is one of those XDT 941 series brushes that I like so much. I think they're what are they, $9.99 a set or something? You get them from eBay, and it's cheap Chinese brushes with natural bristles, and this is their number one. And you put this beside one of their other number ones, and it'll be a completely different shape with no consistency at all. But you find the ones that you like. It's like this one is really good to treat like a tiny little rigger. Um, for doing small trees and things. And long lines, detail lines. Uh, it does okay for signing my name. It very quickly will hold too much water and then dump it all at once every now and then if I don't keep the consistency right. That's again why it's nice to have paper so you can do a test run. All right, I'm gonna breathe out, hold my breath, and draw a couple of red stripes on this dinky little lighthouse. And in the time that I held my breath, the paint dried on that one little bristle that's sticking out there. There we go. That's good lines. Good enough. All right, I'm gonna add some flowers. Once I got the red in my brush, get some more my signature out here in the red, just because it stands out a little bit. I'm using a transparent red, so it goes on and it's pretty bright, but it dries into the painting, so you can see it's there, but it's not, overwhelming like a cadmium or an opaque red would be. That red, and I do want to put. This is the fun part for me. This is like, hey, I've survived, you know, the initial composition that I had no idea what I was painting, and now I was like, okay, I see what's happening there. Um, I'm gonna put tiny aerial on the top of the lighthouse. I'm gonna add a couple of chimneys and just some structure things around the buildings. Maybe one dark window here and there. Um, Overall, I'm pretty happy with that. The water's pretty loose. I struggle with over detailing, and I'm getting the white paint out now, and I'll go through and add way too many waves or things like that out here, and it ends up looking overworked. Well, it's because it is. Um, oh, I just almost made a pink house there. I'm using white paint to kind of super define the front of this one house because, since the light source is there. And I'll give it a little line on the front of the lighthouse too. And maybe on the roof. That roof is a little too much black. Ooh, be careful. Under that house with some white details, and they're gonna white trunk of a tree over here, and these darks just to kind of brush up the light side of this rock, and add some dots here and there. Well, I'm not mumbling too much. If I put my microphone down on my face, it's in my face. You can't see my face. God forbid you don't get to look at me. Out here there's a couple of spaces that should have a little more breakup, since this is ocean. So I'm just tickling those in there with treating this thing like a rigger, kind of enhancing a couple shapes. But again, this is where I tend to overdo it, and it's real easy to do. One more pass over the front of this house. It kind of went pale or washed out, I guess, the white paint that I put out there. This is Shinhan's white, Chinese white they call it, but it's their titanium or their old brand. I'm not sure what they're doing nowadays. I've noticed some some issues with Shinhan's new formulations, and I'm not sure what changes they made, but a lot of companies are, they struggle, and they end up making those decisions that, I mean, it's sort of got to be made, but it's still disappointing to see a brand kind of go, not necessarily down the tube, but just down a different avenue of quality, if you know what I mean. uh, Lucas being one of those brands that became quite a disappointment when Daler Rowney bought them. But yeah, I noticed some stuff with Shinhan as well. That's the quality has dropped a little bit. All right. One thing about working with paintings this size, there's only so much you can do as far as detailing. It'll get busy quick. I do need to add some shadow over there. I can see a little bit behind that lighthouse. So yeah, I'm gonna pause this real quick. Before I varnish, I always spray with a fixative um, to set the watercolor and hold it to the paper, because my the varnish I've really been liking lately is this Joe Sonia. It's an acrylic varnish. It's a polyurethane water-based varnish. Uh, Works really well over watercolor, and the matte is great because with textured paper, if you use a gloss, any angle the light is going to pull highlights off the paper, and it makes it really hard to see the image underneath. But this stuff has been great. It makes the colors pop a little bit. Um, yeah, the fixative is imperative because it's a water-based varnish. If you just use it, it will lift the watercolor. Sorry, I'm doing two things at once. It's not an easy thing for me. Yeah, I start sputtering. All right, I'll be right back. As soon as I remember how to pause this, what in the world is happening? Okay, I'm back. I just stepped outside real quick and sprayed it with fixative because it's real stinky. Um, I blow dried it right before I went out there, and when I came back as well to dry the fixative up. Um, Now I'm gonna varnish it both front and back. Uh, and you'll see, I mean, you can see the paper's buckled, like all watercolor paper buckles. You'll see how after I put the varnish on both sides, how it tightens it back down and makes a nice flat piece of cardigan. So shake this just a little bit. The solids do tend to kind of separate out of this and sit on the bottom. I just kind of, wow, there's a piece of what? The hair in the, how I got in there. All right, so I just put a little blob on there, and I like to work the edges first. Even with the fixative, this first pass, I always get in there, get it down, and get out, and I'm done. If I keep messing with that, it will lift the watercolor and spread it around, which is kind of cool sometimes, because if you got a lot of harsh edges, it'll kind of soften them, and working this small like this, it's hard not to have a bunch of solid edges. Let me blow dry this real quick. I can watch when I tilt it up on blow drying like this. I can watch the sheen disappear, and that's how I know it's drying. Um, Now the varnish is still, that was just the first pass. It's still kind of flexible as it's curing, and so I work the cockles and buckles out of the paper while I'm doing that, and I'll put two or three more, or one or two more coats on there. Occasionally I might do a little more around that lighthouse. Remember, I had that tear in the paper. This is actually going to reinforce that tear and cover it up, and you won't be able to feel it in the final finish of the piece. So once that initial one dries, you can work a little more and make sure you get a nice even sheen on there. Um, but that initial pass, it needs to be done and get out of it. Each pass that I put on here, each layer coat, I guess, the paper buckles less and less because it's being sealed. The varnish is sealing it against the moisture that makes it buckle and stretch and shrink as it dries and that sort of thing. All right, I'm going to do one more on the face. Clean up all my dribbles here. That is a lot of finish. Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll get a nice thick coat for the final coat on this, and then I'll use the excess to show you what happens if you don't spray fixative on your watercolors and you try to varnish it with a water-based varnish. I just go out far enough to get around the border, um, because when I cut it, I mean, I'm just gonna have a bunch of wasted finish there if I spend a whole lot of time making it perfect. So let's look at this tree that I did here. This, I don't think I sprayed it with, I kind of kept the fixative down here. So you'll see how quickly this reactivates. Now I can do, yeah, even that. I got a nice even coat. I could let that dry and then it would be sealed, but you can, yeah, you can see the smears from the ultramarine blue, and then I can see them. I don't know if you can, the yellow smears going this direction. It immediately reactivates that stuff. Um, I will eventually have my studio set up properly, and rather than use the aerosol spray cans that I have, uh, I would rather use my airbrush and thin this stuff out and spray it on there, because then you spray it and it dries quickly, and then you've actually got a water-based sealant on there versus the aerosol one. I'm gonna blow dry this. Now you can see that ultramarine smear on the tree there. Um, it gets particularly bad in sky when you've got, you know, all this green would get pulled up into the sky and look terrible. The red stripes on my lighthouse there would get pulled and stretch my signature that I did in red without that fixative. But now this is now the tree is sealed. Now I could go crazy and put as many layers as I want. So I have at times gotten away with not using the fixative and just being real quick with a big soft brush, as much area as you can cover at the same time with one pass. Um, but it's just safer to spray the fixative on there, especially when I have so many little details and things that can easily get washed away in a varnish. All right, so that's that. I need to put my little provenance information on the back, and what I do when I'm when I'm using the 4 on a 16th sheet, there's no room for error. I can just run across through the middle of the paper and know that I'm writing at a particular part. But, you know, I got my border on the front, I turn it around, I got to write on the back of this picture, but I need to be able to see where those borders are. I don't like to cut it out prior to varnishing. It's nice to be able to hold on to something while I'm working with the piece. So what I'm doing right there is I'm just relaxing the paper. You can see the paper, even with only being varnished on the front, it's come back into a, a pretty decent flatness. And once I trim it, it'll just be perfectly flat, like a baseball card. Um, so what I do is I flip it over, hold it up to one of my lights, and just trace out on the back just to the outside of those borders, so I know where to draw or write my stuff and stop, so I don't go beyond the edge of the card. So that's all I needed, was just a little bit of that. What are we gonna call this? I always have to invent names of things. Um, Art whale, bee paper. We're gonna call this Willerby Bay. Now that's the name of that place we just invented, is Wellerby Bay. Um, and I'll put my studio name on here. Where I'm at. My studio, I've moved my studio quite a few times over the years, so it's kind of fun to look back at my old paintings and see, oh, that was back when I was in Weatherford or, some other place. And I like to sign the back as well. And the date is 07/09/2022. And I'm using Art Whale Watercolor on B paper, 140-pound cold press. And I use a poly varnish. So, and I do this in graphite on the back because graphite won't come through the paper, whereas some inks, if it sits in a lot of humidity or something, they'll sink into the paper, and you'll be able to read them from the front backwards. So I use graphite because it just sits on the top, and I brush off the excess, because when I varnish it, if I don't, it'll smear the graphite. It's still going to a little bit, but I like to put the varnish on the back. It not only protects the paper from moisture, both sides, front and back. It also makes this provenance a lot harder to tamper with. Um, some people worry about that, forgeries and things. Not that I'm a famous artist or anything like that, but yeah, you can never know. I got to die someday, and that's when you get famous, right? Is after you die. So everybody that has one of my pieces of art that has graphite under varnish on the back of it can sleep safe knowing that Wellerby Bay was created by me and no one else. So I just do one coat of varnish on the back. I don't really even pay attention. Well, I don't spend a lot of time making sure it's all even. I just want to get it on there because it soaks into the paper. You can see how the paper swelled up on the back while I did that. And so while I'm drying it, I'll work the paper, and as the polyurethane dries, it shrinks, and that'll bring that paper back into a nice flatness. All right, I'm happy with that. Happy with the front. So that's that. Anyway, I'll go ahead and finish it out. This is this is one of the parts that makes me nervous always, is this cutting out, because it needs to be a perfectly straight line I have a paper cutter right over there. I don't like using, the big standard paper cutter like what you have in school, because that's it's a shearing motion, which is exactly what these are, but both sides of these are sharpened, so you get an even cut, whereas a paper cutter can kind of push the fibers down if it's not as sharp as it could be, which, is the case a lot of times. So what I did was buy a long pair of seamstress shears, or I don't know, or tailor shears or something. Uh, they got nice long blades, so I can do these cuts in one pass. I had to take a couple there because it did warble on me at the top while I was talking. I always kind of feel with my finger to make sure that it feels nice and smooth. I kind of lost the line there. I got into a dark area. Once I cut that out, I pitch these, and this is with all watercolor papers that I use. I pitch the small stuff because it's it's got varnish and stuff on it. But I'll save this. Uh, I can always prime it with gesso and use it for an oil painting or an acrylic painting or something. Uh, same ACEO size. I even save the small stuff because, I make dollhouse paintings and things too, real small, 1 inch by 3/4 of an inch paintings. And, you know, paper's paper. So I'm always going to be a miser that way. And I also make my own paper sometimes. So I save a lot of scraps, especially the cotton stuff, and pound that up, pulp that up, and make my own watercolor paper too. I always have a little box going of scraps and things. I like to, I like to darken or color in the edges of my ACEO, cut edges of my ACEO. And I think it looks nice. It kind of it gives the painting just a little bit of a frame. So now all four sides are dark. And this is where, you hold it up and I can look at it, and the plastic, the poly varnish that's now in both sides of the paper, you can really manipulate it and work all the little kinks and that sort of thing out. Um, yeah, there's what do we call it? There's Wellerby Bay. This fun. This is one of my favorite parts about art. Is it feels like you know, I'm creating a little world of my own every time I paint something that I don't have a plan for. I don't look at pictures and things. Um, yeah, on the eBay that goes, you can't even feel the where the tear, or I tore the face of that paper off that little place, after when I masked the uh, the horizon line there. That varnishing your stuff. I have no problem handling this now. Regular watercolor paper is very absorbent. If you got oil on your fingers, we all do. Um, that'll soak right into the paper. By putting that varnish on there, you give them some protection. That can be wiped with water now. Uh, the brush that I use, just cheap Transin, real cheap Transin nylon hair bristles. Um, I brought this in to replace my trusty, this thing's at least 12 years old, also cheap Chinese nylon bristle brush that I've trimmed the bristles off of, as it, you can see how it's just sort of fraying out. But I've been using this as my varnish brush for a long time for these things, and have forgotten the varnish in it overnight, and like, oh no, it's ruined. And you can see right here on this brush, I've been using this for, I don't know, a month and a half or so, and I think at least twice a week I forget to rinse it out after I varnish, and then I got to pick all this crap out of here. But for being a cheap transit brush, I don't mind, doing what I'm doing right now. I wouldn't never do anything like this with a Kolinsky or even even a remotely expensive acrylic, even not acrylic, nylon or Taclon or whatever artificial bristles are. But with this thing, when I leave the varnish in it, I do what I did with the other one and just run my thumbnail across it and pick all the stuff out after I leave it soak in the water for a couple of hours, and it just keeps going. So I'll probably have this one for another 10 years before I have to replace it with something else. But this came in a set of just real cheap brushes, and I use them a lot with the oil painting and things. Uh, yeah, mm, cheap stuff that works just as good as using an expensive brush to put varnish on a tiny little baseball card size um, painting. So while I'm getting this thing into a penny sleeve, I'll real quick touch base with kind of was the whole goal of this video to begin with, was to explain the changes I made to this after I did the initial video. All I did was I pulled the phthalo blue off of this side. I moved all of these things up because when I was doing the video before, you saw I just wasn't paying attention when I was putting these out. I kept putting these big blobs of colors. I don't use these colors very much. You saw what I used for the red, two tiny stripes and my name and a couple of flowers. Uh, I don't use these colors very much, but I do use them, so they need to be in there, but they didn't need to be spread out as far. Uh, I haven't done anything with the ultramarine blob that I had here with the binder issue. I'm just using it, and as it uses, I'll pick it up with the palette knife or something and move it over. I got my Payne's gray and Van Dyke brown or whatever. I don't remember what brown I used. They're dark brown. I think it has some black in it. Uh, Leaving those, I use those all the time. I use these all the time. Clearly mixing my raw sienna mix. Uh, the green and the yellow and the blues I use for mixing my trees and stuff. And then my skies, I do a lot of cerulean, and I'll mix it with phthalo or ultramarine. The lemon yellow I haven't been using so much. I can I can draw this yellow out, dilute it quite a bit, and get a pretty good approximation of this yellow. But this is a cooler yellow. It tends to go green easier, but it's also pretty weak. So weak, like weakly pigmented. So yeah, this has not changed much. As I use them, I'm kind of smashing them back to the edge. I would like to have a little more mixing area, like what I have here now is useful. Like the few times that I do a violet, I can get it in there if I need to, or a purple. I don't use purple very much at all. So there it is, into the penny sleeve it goes, and off on eBay with its other pals, and affords me to be able to buy some more art supplies and make bigger, better stuff. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for sticking around with me. I'm going to spend the rest of the day doing some speed paintings, just little ACEOs. I need to paint more. I haven't been painting as much, so I want to knock out a few videos of just the speed paintings that are fun to watch. Take 4 minutes to watch me paint a whole painting, and they're actually fun for me to look back to over time and kind of run the slider bar to speed it up and watch it sort of grow into a picture from a piece of white paper. It's always very hard to start a painting and make your first marks. So yeah, it's nice to see that yes, it will eventually be something, and even if it's not good enough for anything, but just being covered over with gesso and turned into an oil painting or something like that. But yeah, that's thanks for watching. Bye.